I've played tons of games in my life, and perhaps one of the most common genres that I encountered as a kid was the coveted first-person shooter. There was nothing more cathartic than having a bad day and just coming home and slinging bullets at bots or annihilating the enemy. Maybe you even used a fancy new bad word that your parents couldn't hear in a chat room. It was a time to be alive. But what were the best first-person shooters I've personally played? That's the topic of today's episode. Now bear in mind, I'm going to primarily talk about games that I have streamed or that I can personally recall playing in my life. I obviously haven't played many, so this is going to be one of those yearly recall episodes that will be updated in a year's time, which I love because keeping a living episode isn't something you see often on YouTube. So hopefully you enjoy it, and don't get too upset that I haven't played your favorite game. Let's begin. There was an era where me and my former lead moderator, Lord Knight CalebCom, went through the entire Master Chief collection. Might as well have, they were all there. Halo 3 was excellent. Now if you've watched my previous episodes, I've made it quite apparent I didn't own an Xbox 360 as a kid. In fact, it wasn't until I was 20 that I bought one. Then I got bored with it and I sold it. Then I got another one after having a bad day when I was 27. It was cheap. I couldn't pass it up. Halo 3 takes place in 2552. The plot alone actually follows a comic tie-in known as Uprising, and during the game we discover that the Ark is creating another Halo. For anyone who has never played Halo before, a Halo is a ring world. They were created by the Forerunners as weapons against the Flood. Basically, if shit hits the fan, it would just server ban the entire galaxy. It's a great game and it is plot heavy for a FPS, so if you want to check it out, I do suggest that you do. With it being somewhat deep in the lore of Halo, I don't want to spoil it, but just know, it is a great game. Time to hop onto the Saturn with this one. This was actually the second Saturn game I ever played. My entire Saturn library is incredibly small. I think off the top of my head, I only have about 12 games, because they can be incredibly expensive, that's just how it goes. But the Saturn, that's a damn good console. Honestly, my experience with it has been delightful. 90% of the games I've played have been fairly decent, quite decent. I've loved them. And the one that stood out to me the most was Robotica. Now this game is interesting because it's a first-person shooter in a style that might throw you off. It's a dungeon crawler with FPS elements. It takes place in 2877, where this government known as the World Silent Security Service maintains peace courtesy of this floating station known as the Daedalus. But people know it's basically the Death Star. You play as a guy from the Reformist faction, and you're the sole survivor of a 3-man suicide trip to destroy the Daedalus. Now the cool thing about this is that it's 100% random how the floors will be set up. Our objective is to get a keycard, so if you really wanted to speedrun it, you could. There's only 30 floors, and I had an absolute blast with this game. ODST was interesting. When you play so many different Halo games, you get used to being the jackass of all trades, the sole protagonist that protects the universe over and over and over and over again. So when we have the opportunity to see a small vignette of events that happen in the lore of Halo that don't consider Master Chief, I think that's nice. We play as a rookie and we work with Dutch, Romeo, and Mickey traveling through space. ODST stands for Orbital Drop Shock Troopers, or Helljumpers. They get into HEVs and they drop into the battlefield. That's what we're doing when suddenly out of nowhere a Covenant ship says Buenos Dias and zips into the atmosphere, resulting in our team crashing and being separated. That's the whole idea of ODST. We're going around the environments piecing together what happened to our team, who we are actively trying to find. It's a big ol' escape the city with brute force kind of game, and I did enjoy it for what it was. The multiplayer was also fairly decent, but I mostly played this for the co-op experience. Call of Duty was kind of weird to me. By the time I knew it existed, Call of Duty Modern Warfare was a thing, and I was much more of a Medal of Honor kid because I loved the topic of World War II. When I was in college, that was my torrenting era, and boy did I acquire some PC games. Call of Duty 1 was one of them. but then I got kind of confused when I saw Finest Hour on the PS2, so I played that one instead, and it was then that I noticed that there was kind of a divergence in the versions. The PC and the PS2 versions are very different. Call of Duty 2 did not exist on the PS2, but it did on the 360, so what I thought was Call of Duty 2 was actually Big Red 1, which was a spin-off, and I loved it as a kid, but I couldn't stand it as an adult. When it comes to these, I do try to play them in order of release, but I've considered playing them in timeline order because it's nice to stay in the same era, if that makes sense. Now, if you've played one Call of Duty, you've essentially played them all, push forward, take out enemies, get bored with the main story, then hop into multiplayer and have some 12-year-old kid claim to have carnal relations with your mother! I love Call of Duty 2, and at some point I'll continue the lineage, and I feel this might get knocked down a few pegs, but we'll see. Come back in a year. There were tons of James Bond games out there. It was a popular character from Ian Fleming, and to be honest, the franchise was in dire straits for a long time. Historically, the franchise was all over the place when it came to video games. At least 23 games were released before the series hopped to the PS2 with Agent Under Fire. Some people think Agent Under Fire is a bad game, but I think it's great. But the next game, that's where it was at. Nightfire took everything that made Agent Under Fire interesting to me and literally put me in a believable scenario as James Bond. The previous game was more shoot people when they show up, but in Nightfire, it was almost like an adventure game. So many cool aspects and levels that made sense. Plus, it was produced by Randy Squirt Porn Pitchford. What a lad. If you want a good laugh, look up Randy's USB story. You'll get a giggle from it. Now, plot-wise, the game involves 007 working with Dominique Paradis to prevent a stolen nuclear weapon from being detonated inside of Paris. But as with most James Bond plotlines, something dubious gets uncovered, and now we need to travel the world doing dumb shit. But like I said, the dumb stuff, it's so worth it, tremendously worth it. This is one of those games that I wish I could go back and check out for the first time. There was a period of time where my current lead moderator, King Nick 69, had an absolute boner to make me finally break down and play Wolfenstein, and once I did, properly mind you, actually beating it, I was interested to see where the franchise went, or more importantly, where it started, which if you're curious are two dreadful games on retro PCs, not a big fan of them. But Wolfenstein 3D, that was the shit. Spear of Destiny, that was the ultra shit, and the extra mission pack Return to Danger was dog shit. Nick then made me play Return to Castle Wolfenstein, which I was dreading because like I said, the previous game was horrible, but this was solid. Now granted, I was conned into playing the highest difficulty by my resident gutter gremlin Cohark the Drunk, a wonderful regular on the Twitch side of things, to play the hardest difficulty, and I'll be damned, I did. It was a struggle. The game sometimes felt brutally unfair, especially with some of the more elite units, but I did enjoy this game tremendously. In the game, we play as BJ Blazkowicz on a mission from the Office of Secret Actions. The bad mustache men are up to no good in the neighborhood, and this time they're trying to bring back Heinrich I, courtesy of the Thalian dagger. Yeah, it's weird. I never really paid attention to just how gimmicky the Wolfenstein series was with the paranormal stuff until I finally played through Wolfenstein 3D. And while I could have put Wolfenstein 3D on this list, I did prefer this one. It was great. I know there's a lot of Halo on this list, I just haven't played that many FPS games. I've let my community dictate what I play for a long time, 7 years, and most of the time I get plagued with RPGs, platformers, and subpar action games. That's just the inside joke. The good news is, occasionally I play decent games, and working down various franchises allows me to create the content with the experience I have on these games. Without those strange hops between franchises, I wouldn't have had the chance to explore so many. But Halo 4 was great. It expanded tremendously on the weapons for both the humans and the Covenant, and it's par for the course for the franchise. The story is great. It picks up where we left off with Halo 3, and because, yet again, Halo is quite story-driven, I can't really break down the finities, but there are quite a few different abilities we have, and the multiplayer is just as fun, if not even more fun, than before. This might be one of the situations where you tell me I'm wrong, and I just nod and say, Okay. Some people will be loyalists and call this a tactical shooter, which, let's be honest, it is. It 100% is, but it's from the first-person perspective, so in some ways I do consider it an FPS. I mean, it's not an FPS in the sense that Halo or Call of Duty is, and it's certainly not a boomer shooter like Duke or Doom, so meet me with an olive branch. I promise I'm not as dumb as I look. Rainbow Six has an interesting start. Obviously, Tom Clancy's novels were a big deal. He was an American bestseller when it came to writing espionage and military-based novels. In fact, I don't know anyone else who I can name off the top of my head that covered the topic so well. At one point, he wanted to make video games. I mean, all the cool people were doing it, so he started working with Virtus Corporation, who only really focused on 3D development tools to create SSN based on the book SSN. After that game was developed, he said, "Oh man, this is interesting." And from the book Red Storm Rising, the company Red Storm Entertainment was born. And as such, a massive line of epic games like Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon, and more were created. But Rainbow Six was the first I played, and I fell in love with the series. I will say please either play the PC version or the Nintendo 64 version, because the PS1 version of Rainbow Six is obnoxious dog shit that is not representative of the source material. I think out of all of the Halo games I've played, this one was the best. And I'm sure it isn't the best gameplay wise, and I'm sure the later Halo games blew this one out of the water for you, but for me, the plot alone was the big reason why I love this game. So unfortunately there isn't much I can say without ruining the entire game for you. This isn't one of those episodes where I'm willing to do it, so who knows, maybe one day I'll do a series Slayer and we'll break down all the stories, but for now, I'm not going to do it. There is some interesting history behind this though. After the success of Halo 3, there was supposed to be a game with Peter Jackson. Where the hell does he fit in? Well, if you know Peter Jackson, you know that he created the studio Wingnut Films, which gave us King Kong, District 9, and more importantly, Lord of the Rings. At some point he decided to get a hair up his ass and he created Wingnut Interactive with the whole idea of working alongside Microsoft to publish games, but they never did. Halo Chronicles was the game that was supposed to be developed, but it was cancelled. The team that was assigned to Chronicles was instead assigned to create Halo 3 ODST, and then there was a split with a secondary team working on a game called Reach. Reach is a phenomenal game. I cannot begin to stress just how great the storytelling is in this game, and as a prequel to where it all began, this is a must-play if you want to get into Halo. The FPS to rule all FPSs, Doom is the most in-your-face, badass game of the era, and it created the want to keep the genre going. It was made by the fine folks at id Software, namely the dream team of John Romero, Tom Hall, Adrian Carmack, and John Carmack, a group of 20-year-olds that wanted to create something new and different, edgy and violent, something that would align with the counterculture of gaming, and guess what? They did. Doom is a standard. Nothing has come close to the cultural impact that Doom had in 1993. Perhaps the closest thing to it was Wolfenstein 3D, but when push comes to shove, Doom was where it was at. Now, Doom was released in an era where offering 33% of the game was commonplace. The model itself is known as shareware. Apogee and id Software used this heavily. Most of the games were released this way. You would beat level 1 and you'd be amazed by how awesome it was, then you'd mail in a check for the rest of the game, and sometimes it was up to standards and sometimes you kinda got conned, but what do I know? I'm just a boy. Plot-wise, we play as an unnamed space marine who is reassigned after beating the dog shit out of a superior officer who ordered his unit to kill civilians. Also on Mars is the Union Aerospace Corporation, or UAC, which allows the military to run secret experiments. One of those experiments involved teleportation and, well, hell breaks loose. Literally! Most people don't care for the plot in the early Doom games, but it is interesting and it sets the stage for Doom 2, which I haven't played yet but do look forward to it. By the way, if you want to play the 4th episode of Doom, I would suggest getting Ultimate Doom, and to make it even sweeter, get the Brutal Doom mod. It dramatically changes the game. And that's it for today's list. What did you think of it? What first-person shooters engaged you on a level that is irreplaceable? Feel free to let us know down in the comments below. Who knows, maybe you'll give an idea to fellow community members. Speaking of our community, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of like-minded individuals who love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if you align with that, then you'll fit right in. I do want to take the time to say thank you to all the new community members that helped us hit 8,000 subscribers. I'm glad to have you here on this journey. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortefyre out.